Hello and welcome to I Can't Believe It's Not the Mouse, the podcast all about animation not made by the mouse. I'm your host, Octaviano Macias, and today we're continuing on a series of movies that I've been talking about for a while. I talked about the first one, I talked about the second one, now I'm talking about the third one, and it's often regarded to be the worst one of the bunch. It's often regarded to be one of the worst theatrical animation sequels. Personally, I feel that's not telling the whole story. I am talking about Shrek the Third. Before we get started, I just want to say, if you're listening to this on YouTube, go ahead and give it a like, subscribe to the channel, feel free to comment, and ring the bell for notifications. Also, if you're on Spotify or just any other podcast site, follow this show on those platforms. A quick summary for those of you who have never seen any of the Shrek movies. The first Shrek was about an ogre who's sent to rescue a princess for this, not really a king, not really a prince, just a royal guy, basically, who is very selfish, vain, you know the stuff. Shrek falls in love with the woman, and eventually it's revealed that the princess is half ogre herself. They have a whole Beauty and the Beast moment. Shrek and the princess Fiona fall in love. They get together. They get married. The end. At least that's what we thought. Until we get to Shrek 2, where it's about Shrek meeting the in-laws. And as far as sequels go, it is a really good sequel. I don't think it's as great as a lot of people say it is, but I do think it's a really funny movie. I do think it takes the story in a really good direction. It's one of those things where it's like, when you look at a lot of animation features, especially because of how long we've been essentially drowning in Disney features, it's very hard to see sequels being made for animated features because a lot of them were for the longest time a bunch of fairy tales where it's like, okay, this is just kind of one and done. Like, Happily Ever After is the ending. So seeing a satire of that stuff, decide, well, no, you actually have to go into more of these things. Who are the parents? What kingdom did this princess come from? It was all an interesting idea. And then we get into Shrek the Third. And this is one thing that I will say. For Shrek the Third, as much as it's not good, and I will be upfront in saying that it is not a good movie, Shrek the Third did have interesting ideas for a third Shrek movie. Essentially, the whole movie is about Shrek and Fiona having to come to terms with the fact that they are the next in line for this kingdom. With Fiona, this is not really that much of a big deal. In fact, she's already ready to have kids, but Shrek is not ready for any of that. He does not want to have kids. He does not want to be a ruler. Just none of that stuff. So we then also build upon the sidekick villain from the second movie, Prince Charming, who returns, having become this failure restaurant theater actor, who decides to get revenge by enlisting all the fairy tale villains into helping him out and taking over the kingdom of Far, Far Away. And throughout this, Shrek, since he doesn't want to be king, has to get the next in line to rule the place, which is Arthur, like King Arthur of the mythology, to essentially take his spot, but he also has to come to terms with the fact that he will be a father soon. It's a very messy plot, and you can kind of already see why right there. It's got a lot of things going on. Like, it was already interesting enough to me that this was about an ogre coming to terms with the fact that he's gonna become king of this place. Okay, interesting idea. Now he has to be a father. It's like, okay, a little bit more, but it's still an interesting idea. Then it's like, okay, let's have this other character. Let's throw in Arthur, who isn't a fairy tale character, but he is from the myths. And let's also include the villain from, the sidekick of the last movie, becoming the full villain in this one. And yeah, it starts to build upon a lot of problems with this entry. It's that it's got a lot of things, and to be fair, a lot of these are good ideas. I do think that the idea of making Prince Charming the villain, while not perfect, was an interesting idea to go with. I personally would have still kept him as the sidekick villain, maybe have Arthur, who would have been the full-on villain, and I don't know, maybe by the end of the movie, they could have, instead of having a ruler for Far, Far Away, they could have been like, hey, let's establish a democracy. That way Shrek can, leave this thing without having to necessarily feel like he's just abandoning it for someone else. Oh, and by the way, yes, I will be doing
spoilers.
This is a movie that is nearly 20 years old. It's a movie that was a massive hit on its release. And, I mean, realistically, I feel like most people who are watching this already know Shrek, as a whole. They already know that there was another Shrek after this. If I'm completely honest, it's not even like the franchise itself really acknowledges this entry much beyond the fact that Shrek has kids. So I feel like there's no real reason for me to hold back on spoiling the story. Got it? But yeah, Shrek the Third. Like I said, I do think that there was interesting ideas. And for that, I will say that this is not as bad as some people say it is. It's still not good, but I do think it had potential. I do think that even going past the ideas that it had, there are some funny jokes in here. Like there's a whole joke where Shrek has a nightmare about the babies. I know a lot of people consider it to be a very messed up joke, but I do, since I have a dark sense of humor, I did laugh when Shrek complains about how someone better be dying for constantly interrupting him and Fiona's alone time. And then the reveal is that, yeah, the father is dying. I do think that jokes like that work, but there are a lot of jokes that kind of just fall by the wayside. Like, even though I've already summarized the movie, there's a lot in here that just feels like it's not even necessary, but it is a big chunk of the movie, and it's not even funny. Like, there's a whole subplot involving Puss in Boots and Donkey swapping bodies. It's in the latter portion of the movie, but it's not a very funny storyline, and it's not something that was really all that needed. And again, it just feels like you're just cluttering a movie that was already so cluttered. A lot of the new characters that are introduced in this are not really good. Arthur, very annoying character. Justin Timberlake is clearly trying, but there's nothing enjoyable about his character. He's just a loser. And it's like, I mean, you kind of already did this whole version of Arthur back with like the Sword in the Stone. Only difference is that now they're more directly making it a high school loser instead of just a regular loser. Merlin, just absolutely annoying again. This is an outcast teacher in this version who's just gone crazy, but he's also a hippie, and none of it really works. There's a whole thing with Fiona and the princesses, specifically the Disney princesses, and again, it's like, okay, you might have a cute joke here and there. You have a lot of funny actresses in these roles, but at the same time, it's like, I mean, every joke that you can think of has already been done. Like, oh, look, Sleeping Beauty is always asleep. Cinderella is obsessively cleaning stuff. The girls are kind of pieces of shit. The only thing that's kind of interesting, and that's only if you were aware of this at the time, now it probably wouldn't land as well, is that Rapunzel is a part of this group. Even though at the time Disney had not made a Rapunzel movie, it ends up being like a cute little hint that she's going to be the one that betrays the group. And it's like, yeah, there's something there. I mean, I'm not going to lie that there is an idea there in terms of mocking the princesses and having them eventually rescue themselves. But the movie doesn't really do enough to really justify them being there. It really just feels like, okay, let's add in another thing that we could make fun of Disney for, even though there's not really much substance to it. And to its credit, it probably would have worked more if it was, I don't know, I wouldn't say like a whole movie onto itself, but maybe like a short or something. Like, if this was something where it was given its own time to breathe, it probably would have worked a lot more than it ends up working, which not really. The only thing that's kind of amusing is just beyond what I've already said, is that you have Julie Andrews returning as Fiona's mother, so it kind of feels like, okay, we got someone of Disney royalty in here, but you can ignore this portion of the movie and it doesn't really do much to her. That it's just really there to give something for Fiona to do. And the idea of doing this whole like, oh, let's have the princesses essentially fight their way through containment and whatnot, just feels like something like, okay, well, we kind of already did that even in the first Shrek movie, but just with Fiona alone. We're just now doing it with the Disney princesses, which again, it's just kind of whatever. I don't know. Again, the only piece of interesting lore there is that Rapunzel ends up being the bad guy because at the time she wasn't one of the Disney princesses. But the movie doesn't even go much into that. So what you're left with is really just a story of Shrek deciding to abandon responsibility. And yeah, they try to have it both ways by saying, well, he's not really abandoning responsibility because he's still going to be a father. But at the same time, I'm just like, okay, well, he's still leaving the care of this entire kingdom to a teenager who has never ruled. And while I will admit that Arthur eventually gets a pretty decent speech to calm down the villains, it still just feels like this guy is not ready for this job. And it just feels weird that the movie is so insistent about responsibility when the main character is essentially just kicking it off to someone else. Yeah, he's gonna be responsible for something else, but that's not the thing he was running away from initially. So it still just feels like, okay, you're running away from things without having a clear solution, which is why I just feel like maybe the best solution would have been if instead of him pushing off the kingdom to someone else, the result would have been that the citizens of far, far away decide to implement a democracy. As a result, Shrek is essentially given his chance to leave this lifestyle without exactly just running away from responsibility. I don't know. I'm not here to fix the movie. I'm just here spitballing ideas of what I think could have made these ideas work more. So where exactly did this movie go wrong? I can't honestly say. It's easy to say that it was because it had a different director from the previous entries, but I don't know. I just feel like that's kind of like the laziest possible answer to that question that I can think of. From the beginning of this movie, it already feels very different from the other Shrek movies because instead of opening with a book, it just opens with the play that Prince Charming is now doing. From there, it just keeps on feeling weird. Like, a lot of the jokes are very much edgy, but at the same time, it just doesn't feel right for the Shrek franchise. A lot of the story beats feel more childish, even though they're still as mean-spirited as before. So, yeah, that's actually one of the weirder things about this movie, is that for as much as this movie still feels very messed up and cruel compared to other animation features, it definitely feels like the most kid-friendly of the Shrek movies. Like, it just screams, this was made for the kids in the audience. And sure, the Shrek movies aren't exactly adults-only features, but you go back to that first and second one, and you see that they had a lot of, not even just adult jokes, but just moments that I feel like only really land until you're an adult yourself. But yeah, this one was very tame in comparison. It's just got a whole mixture of ideas that don't really land with it. Whether it's like, okay, let's do the princess thing, let's do the stuff with the body swap, which I don't know what was even the purpose of that. I don't know, maybe they thought that Freaky Friday was gonna be relevant even at that point, even though the popular iteration that had come out around that time was already 4 years old. Yeah, I don't know, because there is a lot of interesting ideas. It's just none of it really gels together. Personally, I would have kept the whole thing with Shrek trying to abandon the kingdom, and if you wanted to keep the father thing, that would be fine. And that actually ends up carrying over to the fourth movie, which when we get to the fourth movie, I'll just spoil this right now. It is a vastly superior movie to this. But for this specific entry, I feel like a lot of the charm was definitely lost. There was clearly, still an attempt to mess with the fairy tale formula. But when your villain is essentially the sidekick of the villain of the last movie, it just starts to feel like, okay, well, you're just doing the same thing. Like, hey, what if we took this known figure in fairy tales and made them the villain? Again, I do still think that there could have been potential there with the whole idea of having the villains rallying around to basically be like, hey, what about our happy ending? And then having the resolution being like, hey, you guys could still get your own happy ending. If Shrek was able to do it, you guys should too. I just feel like it should have been a different character leading this. Again, maybe it could have been Arthur, like if you wanted to keep that character and have Arthur essentially take Far Far Away from Shrek, or maybe, he accepts it from Shrek, and then it turns out like, oops, yeah, Shrek, you made a mistake. You gave it to someone who is power hungry because they're like, hey, look, he's been a loser, he's been bullied all his life, and instead of becoming a fair and just king, he becomes pretty much like similar to like the villain from Megamind, Titan. You could have had him basically being a loser who decides to take his anger off on a bunch of other people. Could have had Prince Charming being his sidekick. Maybe he convinces Prince Charming, like, hey, look, the reason why you're in this position is because of Shrek. So you could have had him basically come to this conclusion of being a good guy. I don't know. Like, again, I am just giving you ideas. A lot of this stuff, would not work in practice, but it's just something that I'm thinking of, like, okay, how could I have fixed this to make it more streamlined, make it more accessible? But I don't know. It's one of those things where the legacy of this movie is that it is the worst Shrek movie. It's often considered to be one of the worst DreamWorks movies, one of the worst animated sequels that hit theaters. And while I won't necessarily disagree with all of that, I will say that it does have something that a lot of other bad animation sequels, theatrical or not, have going for, something that it has going for it that a lot of those don't, which is that it at least is trying to properly continue the story without exactly just spinning its wheels. It's just that unfortunately it ends up having way too many ideas. A whole lot of them not really well done, but it's understandable what they were trying to do. Even though I'd say that any of the Pixar sequels outside of the Toy Story, well, of course, including Toy Story, like, yes, all the Pixar sequels that I've seen are better than this movie. The difference is that I still feel like Shrek the Third, from a standpoint of, like, is this necessary for the franchise? I'd argue yes, more on this one than I would for something like Incredibles 2 or even Inside Out 2, where I just feel like those are like, okay, you're just kind of repeating the plot of the first movie, just doing some slightly different things. The big differences being that those movies are at least much more entertaining overall because of the cast or whatever they end up doing, versus this movie where I just feel like by the end of it, I just really did not care for anything that was going on. It's definitely one of those movies that just feels like noise. Watching it again all these years later, I didn't hate it. Like, the experience was definitely boring, but it wasn't like anything where I was necessarily angry throughout it, but it was definitely to a point where it's like, I kind of felt like I was already getting ready to do other things as this was going on, just so I can get done with chores or whatever. Like, this was definitely a background type of movie, which is a shame because, again, it does have its good ideas, and for a franchise as strong as this, I feel like it is kind of a letdown to see one of the entries being just background noise, the movie. Sometimes you might get a funny joke, sometimes you might get an interesting idea, but on the greater whole, there's nothing really worthwhile, and if you skip this movie, it doesn't really make a difference to this franchise. Again, you go into the fourth movie, it just does not matter whatever happened here. The only thing that has any real effect is the baby stuff, but you can easily just assume that at some point Shrek had babies and it wouldn't really make much of a difference. So yeah, you can just skip this movie entirely. For a lot of people, this is where the franchise started outstaying its welcome, and it's understandable why. It was at that point where it's like, okay, now we're just doing whatever with this movie, and there's no real reason to even be doing this anymore. That the fourth one came out and the fourth one is good is kind of a miracle, really, just because usually with franchises like this, you'd assume by the fourth entry, they'd be like, okay, let's just dig even further into nonsense and just double down on the worst aspects. But no, it feels like a good improvement over this one. So, I don't know. I can't wait to talk about that one. This one, though, I don't know. I could see how there might be some fans for this. I know there's not really any fans, but if there are fans, I actually do get it, because I do think that it had all the pieces there to make a good entry. So for those of you who might actually see the vision that I don't, I get it, but I can't honestly recommend it, and I can't honestly say that I'd be surprised if anyone hates it. I truly do get why it gets a lot of hate, even if some of it I do feel is a bit overblown. It's just Shrek the Third doesn't really do much for the franchise, and even ignoring that much, it's still not an entertaining movie on its own. It certainly tries. I do think that it tries to continue on the franchise in a way that is meaningful, and with that, I will give it some points, but it's just not a good entry. I don't care about the body swapping storyline. It adds nothing to this movie, which is why I'm barely even talking about that. The princesses, funny concept, does not land, and it just feels like a retread of what you already did with Fiona, only now we're actually doing it with Disney Princess. And then for the most part, a lot of it just does feel like Shrek is still abandoning responsibility, despite them trying to say, oh no, his real responsibility is being a dad. It's like, no, real life does not work that way. If you are running away from this job that is being given to you, that is still you leaving responsibility, even if your excuse is like, well, I'll find someone else who's more suited for it, which we, again, never even see how he's more suited for it, all to do another thing that just happens to be also important. I'm saying that he could have easily remained king while being a father, but that's not the movie they made, and in fairness, I do think, especially once we get to the fourth one, like, yeah, it was probably best not to have him become the king of Far, Far Away. I just would have had it go in a different way so that would have made more sense and that would have worked more. That all out of the way. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again next time.
Then the only person standing in your way is you.
Me?
Get him, lads! Yeah!
Thanks for stopping by. Go ahead and follow this channel. Subscribe, like, and comment. Ring the bell for notifications. Go ahead and also follow my podcast and give some love to my Patreon account while you're at it. It's www.patreon.com/psycams. Again, thanks for stopping by, and I hope you come back for more in the future.